everyone, Rose here, and I'm back! Again. But with silver this time. So, one would expect if I had a bunch of time with like no classes and not many set commitments, I'd have a bunch of free time to make like art and record it and make videos and stuff. But turns out instead I just take on a bunch of projects and commitments and just don't get around to anything, and then the projects that I do have, I just forget to hit record on because, reasons. But here I am with another video. As you can tell by the title, it's another silver redraw. For those of you who have been following me for a while, you know I do this every 2 years. The original drawing was this one from 2016, and I redrew it as one of my first ever drawings on my channel back in 2018, then again in 2020 and 2022. And then I didn't do it in 2024. In my defense, I didn't forget it. I was just busy with a bunch of commitments like I mentioned. So when some time freed up in February of this year, I finally started working on it. As you can tell, it is no longer February, it is July, as of the time of uploading this video. There are reasons for that. This painting stretched for quite a while. But it's done now, so enjoy the process. There are a couple of things I knew I wanted when I started this version. One of them was direct eye contact again. The previous version from 2022 had him looking off into the distance, and while I quite like that version, I think it definitely misses the drama of all the previous ones. I also knew I wanted this one to be more of a scene rather than just sort of a full-body character portrait. The previous ones have been very much centered on Silver as a character in the middle and not much background around it, but for this one I wanted to push him a bit further back and have it feel like more something like he was startled and suddenly noticed someone and just turned around, or he's observing someone from a slightly hidden vantage point. Like something where the environment plays a bigger role and is just more a bigger part of the painting, I guess. Besides the content though, I also had some specific plans for the process for this painting. Specifically, like you can see in the background, I wanted to do a lot more in 3D. This series is always sort of a reflection of where I am as an artist. Over the past couple of years, it's really been following my skill level at painting, but over the past 2 or 3 years, I haven't done that much painting. I haven't focused as much on painting, and I have been doing a lot more 3D work. So it only felt reasonable for this painting to have a lot of 3D as part of the process. For the previous version from 2022, I did actually also do some 3D work. I made a very rough blockout of Silver back then and posed him and used it as reference for the perspective and lighting. But in that case, I had done most of the planning for the pose and such beforehand in 2D, and I went back into 2D again very quickly to work on all the details, so 3D was only a very small part of the planning process. In this case, I did do a couple of sketches beforehand as well, which are these over here, but as you can tell they're very rough and I really only focused on the overall composition and vibe of what I was going for, and less of the very specific pose. You can also see that I'm going into way more detail with the model. I'm actually sculpting a face for him that I can paint over later to add in the remaining small details, but you can actually see all the shapes. I'm getting a very close reference for the lighting. I'm going to get a close reference for position of the eyes and ears and stuff like that. I also blocked in full-on hands. I sculpted in some very mild anatomical details into the arms. And a major thing I did in this one is I actually added a bone rig, an actual armature, to this model. For the previous version I just used the individual pieces and sort of posed them in object mode, but in this case I wanted to really use this model as a puppet to try out a bunch of different poses, and so it was just way easier with an actual rig. It's just a basic Rigify armature that I popped in. I didn't like apply it or generate it or anything, I just used the meta rig and parented all the individual like blockout objects to it. But this way I could actually use stuff like auto IK in order to move around the legs easier. I could use keyframes and pose libraries to actually save the different poses and try out different poses with different camera angles, with different sort of environmental compositions. And it's just overall way easier to pose a model using an actual armature than it is to pose a bunch of individual objects. With my thumbnails, I had fairly quickly decided that I didn't want him like walking around being slightly startled. I had ended up deciding fully on this idea of him looking down at the viewer from some kind of vantage point, like either observing or being a bit threatening or something like that. I had a few different poses in those thumbnails, but I very quickly actually decided that I wanted him kneeling on some kind of either tree stump or rock. I ended up going with a tree stump. So I posed him into this kneeling position and just added in a bunch of basic primitives to function as temporary tree stumps and rocks and shapes in the environment, something that I could use to figure out the composition and reference for lighting later on. And I went into lighting very quickly. I decided on a very dramatic light again for this scene because the silver paintings are always like slightly dramatic. So I went for a really harsh sunlight just from one side. I figured I could always like add additional bits of bounce and fill just while rendering, so really the main light source was the important thing to have in 3D to reference. I also added in a plane with like a gradient as some kind of mist. Not really, it wasn't really necessary, it wouldn't really turn up in the final painting, it was more just for me to get an overall vibe while I was working on the 3D mockup. From here I did a bunch more tweaking with like the lighting and the camera angle, but most importantly I was figuring out the pose. Posing Silver for this painting was a huge challenge. His bow is a problem. Like posing a character with a bow is such a pain. It's bad. I only show like one version of the pose in this time lapse. I think I didn't show the remaining, but it was one of the things I got really stuck on while working on this piece. I tried out a bunch of different variations. They are all fundamentally just him kneeling on this log, like holding his bow in some capacity. But just figuring out how his legs are positioned, figuring out how to put his arms that you can read the pose, but also it makes sense, like with him holding the bow, like, or at least looks like it makes sense. In the end, the bowstring is actually clipping through his leg, but just ignore that. I shouldn't even have told you, you wouldn't have known. It was also a struggle just because of his personality, like what I wanted to portray. With the previous version in 2022, I talked a lot about how I didn't really see Silver as a very overly aggressive character. Like, he isn't going to go out of his way to try and attack someone. He is just actually going to completely try and avoid any and all confrontation. So it doesn't really make sense for him to just be like straight up coming at you with a bow. There would have to really be a reason for that. So I was working with one version for quite a while where he's just holding his bow and he's just casually observing, and it was like, that kind of felt like it could match his personality more, just being a bit more peaceful. But then at the same time it felt almost too relaxed, like he isn't going to go out of his way to try and like have a conflict, try and incite violence, I guess, but he is definitely not going to be just there chilling while there's someone else around. Like, would be a tense situation. So just genuinely for weeks I was stuck between these two versions of the painting, one where he felt too aggressive and the other where he felt too relaxed, and it seems like a very minor thing, but it was really like I couldn't make this decision and I couldn't progress the painting without making this decision. That easily added like a month to the time I was working on this. I ended up picking a pose where he is holding onto his bow and he does have it ready, but he doesn't have it pulled back, so he isn't actively trying to attack, but he is ready to react if something does happen. It's almost like some source of security for him. With the 3D mockup done, it was time to move back to Krita and actually paint. The first thing I did when I opened my render up in Krita was paint over everything with very large brush strokes and airbrush to just sort of get a handle on the composition. Since Silver is fairly small in the painting and he's an all-white character surrounded by snow, it was very important to actively work against the realistic sort of lighting in order to give him the most contrast in the piece. So I darkened down the snow in the foreground and added some extra lights and shadows in the back to really emphasize and frame him and make sure nothing else in the painting really came close to the level of like contrast and intensity in him, so that way he would be the focal point. Next, I traced over all the models to actually make a proper sketch to start the painting with. I could technically jump straight into rendering from this model since it is so detailed, but there are a couple of places that I just wanted to define a bit better, and it's also just a bit easier to have some like sketched out lines to then make into edges later for rendering rather than trying to work with just the model. At this point, I also run into the issue of actually making the eyes look into the right direction. It is going to come up again later. The next step was colors. I just slapped a color layer over everything and added in some different shades of desaturated blues and cyans. I didn't like experiment with a bunch of color thumbnails for this one. I think that's something I am gonna do next time though, just like experiment with some really wacky colors, maybe like a sunset theme or something. But for this one, I felt like sticking to the same color theme I've had for the last few. Next up, I selected the different elements of the painting and separated them out into different layer groups so that way I could work on one element without interfering with the others. I also really like using the either lock transparency or don't affect transparency settings on layers in Krita to just make bigger adjustments to a certain element, and that only works if I actually have a transparency to work with, aka things are separated into different layers. At this point, I also had to go back to the sketch. I had sort of neglected the hands the first time I sketched over Silver because I just couldn't be bothered because hands are hard, but I knew I had to do it eventually and they were starting to bother me, like they weren't at the same level of detail as everything else. So I went into sketching them. As usual, hands are really hard, and hands doing something really specific is even harder, so I had to get a bunch of references. I struggled to find something that worked perfectly, like archery poses in this exact kind of angle. So what I ended up actually doing is just taking my phone and taking pictures of my hands holding a bunch of different pencils and other objects I had lying around, and it actually worked really well. I'm pretty happy with how the hand poses turned out. It's definitely not proper archery technique, but in my defense, Silver is just some guy living in the woods who taught himself archery, so he doesn't know proper archery technique either. Fun fact, actually, Silver is pretty bad technically at shooting a bow. However, he has mild telekinetic powers, and so they just sort of adjust for any garbage aim, and he ends up hitting whatever he was aiming for anyway, so a little lore drop there. Speaking of lore drop, if that seems a bit familiar to you, suspicious maybe even, that is because most of my OCs started out at some point as like the random 3 facts I knew about some Sonic character and was like, oh, what if I make this into an OC? Silver happens to be the only one who actually kept the original name, though to be fair, his current lore is that his full name is actually Sylvester, he just goes by Silver. Anyway, enough lore and back to the actual painting. At this point I was working on the foreground, in part just because it's such a huge element of this painting, but also because it was the only thing that wasn't super defined. Like in the 3D model it was just vaguely lumps, and I hadn't really sketched much in, so I really needed to figure out how that would all work, and how it would also work with the overall composition. At this point in the painting was probably when I was like the least confident. Like I said, hadn't painted much in the past 2 to 3 years, so I was genuinely afraid that this might be like significantly worse than the past 2 versions just because I was super rusty. On top of that, I don't feel super confident when it comes to environments at the best of times, and this is just like such a specific environment that requires so much in terms of references. I was also traveling a bunch this year, so a lot of the times I was working on my laptop with only one screen and no references available, so I had to like squeeze my working on this painting into the handful of times when I was like at home and had a bunch of other stuff that I could have been doing. So that was really stressful. But at a certain point, I finally got into the flow and actually started to feel like, okay, this is working out. I think the thing that did it for me is this one pile of like snow, or it's actually like a bush, where you can peek through the snow and look into these little like holes between the branches or whatever, and it just looks like this weird little cave, slightly intimidating. And I was like, okay, this actually looks good. I do kind of know what I'm doing. I could figure the rest of this out. And I also was on vacation with my family. I brought my bigger drawing tablet along, so I actually had multiple screens to work with again. And I made a bunch of progress and actually started feeling pretty good about where all this was going. I also started to figure out what I wanted from the composition of the foreground. You will notice that I had this one bush in the bottom left corner that I removed. I essentially decided that I wanted this almost path of light coming in from the bottom left of the image and leading in this curve up to silver. I'm not entirely sure if it works, like it's definitely not perfect, but I think it does a decent job sort of allowing your eye to move from one element of the painting to another and then really be guided all the way up to the main focal point, so you kind of know what you're supposed to look at, if that makes sense. Again, I'm not 100% confident it works, but I think it does a decent job. I think the foreground ended up being the part of this painting I spent the most time on, just trying out different things, different brushes, making a bunch of tweaks, and I do think it's worth it. It's definitely the part I like the most of this entire piece. I will say, though, it was genuinely very weird working on this in parts. I usually do a painting like this in winter, and I had originally started in February, but at this point it was like late May, early June, and I was on vacation near the beach with my parents. So I'd be like out in the sun at the beach, and it's like 25 degrees outside and everything, and then I come back in the evening and I'm like chilling and drawing, and it's literally just like ice and snow, and I'm like, it is just very jarring. With the foreground done, it was time for the background. Once again, this was a fairly daunting task. Like I said, I haven't practiced drawing environments much, and forests in general are very challenging, I find, at least, just because there's so much going on. What also added to this is, for whatever reason, I decided to change the scenery from a coniferous forest over to a mixed forest with some deciduous trees. If you don't know, coniferous trees are essentially like pines and stuff, things with needles. They tend to grow a lot straighter and have, in my opinion, easier to draw shapes. It also helps that they keep their needles in winter, so they're full. You can just have them be like a solid silhouette. But deciduous trees are trees that shed their leaves in winter, so if you're going to draw a scene with a bunch of deciduous trees in winter, they have to have their bare branches, and I find those to be quite challenging to draw. To be fair, I think it actually turned out pretty good, but it was something I was messing around with a lot, and took quite a bit of effort. I also added some shrubbery or some younger trees again down to the bottom. That specific element, that one bush, I think bothers me a bit in the final piece, but it is what it is, I guess. If I end up revisiting this painting a little later, which I might do, that's probably one of the things I will adjust a bit. In general, I just didn't spend as much time on the background as I did on the foreground, so it is one of the weaker elements of the painting. It works out alright, I think, just because, it shouldn't be too high detailed and shouldn't be too high contrast, so that it doesn't take away from Silver as a character. The foreground, I think, gets away with being more detailed because it guides your eye towards him, but with the background, I don't want things pulling away from him too much. I actually end up tweaking and washing out a bunch of things just to make sure they're really not too high contrast, so that he's really the most high contrast thing in his immediate vicinity. And after everything else, it is finally time for Silver himself. I hadn't sketched in his gear, like his arm brace and the strap for his quiver, so I added those in and quickly painted them brown. But besides that, it was time for rendering. I started with his face, his eyes specifically, and it was time for struggling to make him look in the correct direction part 2. It is so hard to make a character stare directly at the camera, especially at this scale. When you're making a bigger artwork, you know, you can move things around a couple of pixels and it's fine. Here, if you move any line or any bit of color like half a pixel, he's looking in a completely different direction. It was such a pain, and even now in the final result, kind of questionable whether he's actually looking directly at the viewer. I tried, I promise. I tried for a very long time. I also made a bunch of tweaks to his facial proportions. The ones from the 3D model looked great the entire time, but for some reason while I was rendering they started feeling off, so I made a bunch of tweaks. In hindsight, I'm not sure if those are necessary. I kind of still like how they actually looked from the 3D model, but the current version also works, so it is what it is. Other than that, it was really just me color picking from the drawing and adding in details with my various brushes, blending out the sketch lines I'd made, sharpening some edges, softening other edges, and adding in a bit of fluff detail, especially around his neck and his cheeks. Having done the lighting on the model really made rendering easier because it was so chill. I didn't have to think about where the lights and shadows should be. I could just trust that it was correct. The only places where I adjusted it a bit was if it was necessary for the readability or composition. For example, if I had two completely bright parts of the model that should be at different depth, the knee and the back are kind of close together and would technically have the same shade, but I just made the knee slightly lighter and the back slightly darker so you could see which part is in front, kind of thing. But other than that, very casual, very relaxed. Even rendering the hands wasn't too difficult because I had actually spent enough time making this sketch very detailed, so it was all fairly chill. I am glad it wasn't too challenging because I was really tired of working on this painting at this point. It had been 4 months, I really wanted to be done. It is hot, it's 35 degrees at the moment. I'm sitting in my room. My room is very small and very warm, and my computer is very warm. I also have other projects I want to work on. I kind of alluded to in the beginning. I've realized that I don't work great when I have 50 different creative projects going on at the same time. I just need to be able to focus on a small handful of things. And if you're on the Discord, you know I have one major project that I really have wanted to work on for quite some time. So I'm glad to have this one done and out of the way for that. And speaking of it being done and out of the way, here it is! There are definitely a couple of issues I see with it here and there, and I might go back in and tweak it a bit, but overall I am genuinely actually happy with how it turned out. I think the heat is also making me feel a lot more critical about it. It was a lot cooler yesterday and I was way more happy with how it looked. But yeah, I think overall it is a worthy addition to this series. Here it is alongside all of the other pieces that I've made so far. I think if I'm looking at it on technical painting ability alone, it isn't really a meaningful improvement, especially compared to the previous one. But I think that's fair considering I simply haven't been doing as much painting. Where I think it does shine is just having more of an environment, a bit more of an interesting pose. The other ones are definitely much more just, like I mentioned, these full body portraits of Silver, and this is a lot more of a scene. And if anything, I guess that's more along the lines of my development as an artist, I guess, over the past couple of years. I am studying film, so I've been doing a lot more storyboarding and thinking of composition or something. Anyway, along with this painting, I've wrapped up a couple of other bigger projects recently, or I'm in the process of wrapping them up, so I'm hoping I have a bit more time for personal creative stuff soon enough, especially stuff that I can share here on YouTube, so don't get your hopes too high, because the last time I said I'm back, I was gone for another 7 months or so, but we'll see. I'm hoping to be a bit more active again. If you are on the Discord server, I am actually genuinely a bit more active there, and sharing like progress updates on stuff I'm working on and things like that, so if you're interested in that, I guess join that, there's a link in the description. Anyway, with that all being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and see you all next time. If you did enjoy the video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe and all that, and take a look down in the description below, there are various links to a bunch of things.